So, could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to take up neuroscience? Did you consider any other career paths? What do you find the most exciting in your field of study?
Okay, yeah, it's a nice question. So what inspired me to continue with neuroscience was, I guess after high school, I had a lot of different things that I was interested in, and I wasn't really sure which direction I would continue. So then I started doing a bachelor at sort of a it's called university college. It's a construction where you can sort of take tracks, so different courses, and through that I got into contact with neuroscience, well, with cognitive neuroscience mainly, and I was just fascinated with how, we can pick up a glass, even though sort of we've seen a glass of water that's standing next to us, but I can, by looking at you guys and not at the glass, I can still pick up the glass and drink from it. All those type of things that our brain can do, I just thought was fascinating. So that's really what drove me to continue study cognitive neuroscience as a master. And then within my master, I realized that my fascination was even drawn more to emotions and how we process emotions and how we respond to emotions. So then I was really lucky to be able to do my PhD on that and continue sort of to explore that fascination. So I have not, well, at high school, I considered many options, but then sort of when I found the direction of cognitive neuroscience, I was actually quite drawn to that through my fascination. And then just continued following my fascination, I guess, in that sense. Yeah.
What does a typical day at work look like for you?
So it depends a bit on where your question is going to, because in as a researcher, I guess most typical days would consist. It depends a bit on. It's really different. So you would check your mail, keep in sort of have your mail a bit up to date, reply to emails, but then it depends on whether you're doing one particular study or more studies and in which phase they're in. So either you would be thinking of an idea and a hypothesis around that you're going to test in your research. And then you would sort of set out that study, set it up, and everything that has to do with sort of setting up a study. And with me, it was all involved with human participants, this research that I did. So then it was sort of designing a task that I could test them with, and I would most often use an MRI scanner, for example. So it will be like, what's the best way to measure how their brain is responding in an MRI scanner, and how can we best design this? And then you go into testing phase and test the participants. So it will be recruiting the participants and testing them. And then when you're finished with testing, it will be analyzing the data. So you would be working sometimes for months to prepare the data and analyze the data to see whether your hypothesis comes out. And then it will be the writing phase, so writing up what you found, and also so the interaction hypothesis, how you did it, and then what you found and what you think it might mean. And then it will be a phase of sending it out to journals and getting it published and getting comments back and revising those. So those are all different phases within research that your day could consist of. And then when you're a bit further within research, another part is added, which is writing grants. So coming up with new ideas and preparing for additional funding to be able to do those ideas or writing grants. So I think there is no typical day in research. It can be sometimes that you have multiple days which look really the same, but then you come in a different phase and then those days would look a bit different again. At the moment, though, I'm not working as a researcher anymore, as I sort of stepped away from research and founded my own company with the goal to translate research ideas, to innovate research ideas so they can have a more positive impact on society. So they sort of to take those scientific ideas more out of drawers and with researchers think of ways how they can mean something for society, how they can have an effect. And now my typical day is not typical at all, as when you just found a company, you're doing like a million different things throughout the day. But mail checking is still part of it, keeping in contact with people and all of that.
You founded a company called Innovate Ideas, which you were just talking about. Could you tell us more about it? Like exactly what made you found the company and how many what's your outreach and what exactly you're doing in the company?
Yeah, so what made me found the company was when I was working in Oxford, at the University of Oxford. I got into sort of contact with more entrepreneurs there, and I looked into what it means sort of to work in industry and to do research in industry and what kind of other options there are outside of research. And I also followed some courses at the business school in Oxford, and through those networks, I realized that what I just really enjoyed doing was thinking how scientific results and ideas, how they could translate into something. So outside of research, outside of the papers that are in more into the real world and into the outside world, so to say, and how they could benefit, for example, patients, if it more has a medical direction, or education, or it can have all different kinds of directions. But I like that thinking process to sort of translate those ideas into innovations, and then especially I would want them to have a positive impact on our society, so that actually something good comes out of it. So that was really my driving force to found this company, and that's also what I'm doing with this company. So really thinking at an early stage with researchers, like what kind of impacts could this have? What kind of innovation stream could be involved in this? And then how would you do that? Design a roadmap around it of how to do it. And I think which gaps might be missing. Might there be companies missing? And can we found those? Do we need to sort of construct a bigger consortium than just that researcher to be able to do that, and connect them with the right people to do that, and help them with getting funding for that and all of that. So that's sort of what I'm doing in my company at the moment. And where I'm hoping to go also in the future is to be able to actually work with them further along that path as well. If there's a sort of a tangible innovation coming out of it, to help them to either, if it's going to be a spin out, help them along that route, or if it's more a licensing, to sort of often they're at the university, so it will be with the innovation officers at the university, getting them involved and working along licensing it to a company, for example, the innovation that's coming out of it. So to sort of capture that whole aspect of translating an idea towards an innovation, and sort of working with researchers along that whole path. So that's sort of my vision with my company.
An entrepreneur and a researcher, so like, exactly how do you balance these? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one to balance, I think. So I still have some research papers that are coming out. I did have to sort of draw a line though, because you can't, it's relatively hard to do both, because then you do both half. which might mean you do both not really as well as you could. So I've decided for now to really focus on the part that I'm doing with my company, and with the research papers that are coming out, to more assist in those, but not take like an active role, because that's kind of impossible to combine. So I still feel like a researcher, and I still have my research background, and with that I can also help other researchers and understand other researchers better on that innovation trajectory. But I'm not really active anymore as a researcher.
What are the common mistakes you've seen young women make in their journey that they don't realize? And why do you think there are less women in STEM?
Yes, those are tough ones. So I haven't seen, I think, that many women make mistakes in their journey. Most women that I see actually are really are really ambitious, professional, creative. Have the right drive within STEM. So I don't think that's really a problem. But what I always give as an advice is to pick carefully where you're going to do your work. So if you're going to work in research or outside of research, I think it's the same for all. To really go somewhere that's a supportive environment, so that also the focus of the people where you're working with is also to advance you, to give you opportunities, so that you can develop yourself, so that you can show yourself, like present, or have the right place within publications, or be introduced to people by the where you work, and from that build your network. Because you can go to the best institution that's out there within your field, but if there's a really solitary environment, if it's really one for themselves, each person for themselves, then it's harder, I think, as a woman to advance, because it will be harder to show yourself and to get those opportunities. So that's often the advice I give. Go, if you're thinking of going somewhere, first visit it, see how many people you get introduced to, how many people you can talk to, and ask also the people working there what they think about it, and also women working there, like, and ask them, can you give if it's within research, can you give a lot of presentations? When somebody comes and visit, do you get the opportunity to talk to them? All those kinds of things. I think that is really important, because building a network is just really important. And also having the opportunity to present at different places, or whatever is within your specific field, the important parts to build your career. So that's the most important advice I always give to women in STEM.
What are the major takeaways from your journey? What challenges did you encounter?
The major takeaway is to follow your passion. I think follow what you're interested in at that point. And also that it can be that when you're at the start of your career, you think, oh, I'm going there, and I'm going to work for that to get there. But you don't know how your interest develops along the way. And that might actually mean that you'll take a detour at a certain moment. I think that's the takeaway from my journey, as I always thought that I was going to just continue in research and establish my own group, become a professor kind of, and go up the research journey. But now I've sort of taken a detour and started my own venture. So you can never predict in that way, I think, really where you're going to go. So it's always best to just follow your passion at that point, but also, of course, think what are the opportunities for myself in this passion. And what was your second question?
Did you encounter any challenges?
Oh, challenges. Yeah, I think one major challenge that I encountered was actually around the time that, because I have two little children, and the period of them being really small, I think was a challenge for my career, and I kind of underestimated that. So that's also one thing I'm always telling women now, that it's of course really nice to have kids if you want them, but also take into account that it will have an effect on your career. You can have a really easy baby and stuff and still work, but most often you would just be really tired and happy if you can just do your normal work, and you won't be able to do much next to it. And even your normal work is probably going to be affected, because with all the hormones in your brain just doesn't function as it normally does. So that has an impact. And I know that for you guys, it's still far away, but when that time comes, it's just good to keep that in the back of your mind. It's not something negative. It's something that's just part of it. And you just need to get through it. And then after that, you will get back to it again, and you will pick it up again and continue with your career. So that's one thing. That was a challenge for me, but I'm happy that I didn't postpone it, because otherwise it would have come later, that point as well. And as I said, you can never really predict where you're going to go with your career anyway. So you sometimes see that women postpone having children because it's going to have an impact on their career, but then it will still have an impact later on their career as well. So so that was one challenge. And another challenge I think I've encountered is it's good to move institutes when you work in STEM, to work at different places, because you get a different background of things, different information and everything. But that's also a challenge, because you need to sort of adjust to that situation where you're there again, get to know the people. So it's good to change places, but don't change places too much if possible.
What changes do you expect to see in your field in the next decade?
In my field, in cognitive neuroscience, I expect to see quite big changes, because the field is still relatively young. So I think for the past 20, 30 years, it has really risen. And we use like MRI machines and all those kinds of techniques to get to know more about what's happening inside our brain. And now you see that those discoveries are being translated to actually things that can be more applicable. So you, for example, and that's more called neurotech as well. And I expect to see quite some effects there. So that means, for example, for patients with a disease that is also based in the brain, we'll get, I expect that more treatments will come out to actually affect those disorders, so that people can live with it better. Potentially even like wearable devices that can sort of steer brain activity when it impacts somebody's life, when somebody cannot function through it properly enough, when somebody's shaking or has anxieties or things like that. So I expect that there will be really interesting and significant discoveries happening there.
People may not regard cognitive neuroscience as a conventional field of science, especially because the main fields taught in school are physics, chemistry, and biology. What do you have to say to that?
I think I would say that a lot of the fields that so those are really broad fields within STEM, but there are all these different subcomponents underneath them, and also interactions between the different fields. And cognitive neuroscience is really an interaction between, I think, biology, psychology, which might not be a traditional STEM subject, psychiatry, but also physics is involved in it, because you need to, with the machines that we're working with, we have quite some physicists working in cognitive neuroscience as well. Mathematics, with a lot of different models that you have to use. So with that, it's sort of really a mixture, like an interdisciplinary field of all these major STEM topics. And you might see that when you specialize in a specific direction, that also the direction where you're going in might actually be a mixture, have influences of these different bigger STEM topics.
Oh, I see. How do you think your research impacts the community?
So my research as a cognitive neuroscience has not have a major impact, I think, on community yet, which was probably also why I was searching outside of it, what else I could do with it, because it is possible to have an impact also with cognitive neuroscience, of course, and with what you're doing. And you see that coming out now as well in different applications, but it's still a relatively long journey. And unless you sort of have the funding and you're advanced enough in your career that you can sort of set up a side stream with generating really applicable sort of tangible outcomes out of it, it really remains more theoretical. And even though I've been testing patients as well, you mainly find out with the research that I've been doing that something might function differently in the brain, which is important as well, of course. But then the next step would be to translate that in something that is usable, kind of. And that was not the focus of my research. So that's more the focus of what I'm doing now with Innovate Ideas, with my company.
As scientists, much of your work is done by publishing studies in academic journals and talking with others in your field. As a result, some of the general public may get the wrong impression that science is only for scholars and it's nothing to do with me. How can we make a field of science more accessible to others?
Yeah, that's a nice question. So one part is already happening. That's through knowledge utilization, through talking at festivals, and for scientists really think about how can I make what I'm doing, how can I explain that to somebody who's not a scientist. So really to think about how can you translate that idea. There are also a couple of initiatives that are out there to sort of competitions and things like that to help you to translate that idea. So I think through that, it depends on what you're comfortable with, of course. You see people who write blogs, people who write pieces for newspapers, people who are on TV or on radio. But also on the other hand, you see people who are starting to, for example, develop games, so that, for example, little games on your phone or that you can do on the computer, so that you can get more an idea of how these tasks that are in the lab actually work, and then what the outcome might be from it and what that might mean, sort of, and all of that. So those are also ways how scientists can engage with the community and sort of sharing a bit more about what they're doing and what that sort of in not scientific language, what that means and what this finding might bring in terms of knowledge, or maybe even something that's tangible for somebody who's interested. So I think all of those are examples, and also it might mean looking for yourself where there might be an opportunity, where there might be a place that you could showcase what you're doing, or through writing some kind of flyer. I think there are many ways to do that, and it is rising. At least that's what I'm seeing. It's becoming more and more, because there's actually a request from governments, from the public, from granting agencies then as well. It sort of translates in that way towards the researchers, that they have to incorporate that in their funding applications, of how they're going to make it accessible as well for the public.
Sometimes it's easy for non-disabled scientists to medicalize people with mental illness or neurodivergent people and only see them for their diagnosis. What do you think about that? The question by Sinding.
Yeah, important question. So I think that happens indeed quite easily. So I have worked also with different people with different disorders as well. And I was also always a bit conscious of it. I don't know if I even have always done it in the right way, because I think it is difficult. So one thing that I did that I think helped me a lot was, so I've tested, for example, I've studied people with a social anxiety disorder. And what I did, because I didn't really know that much about it and what it could mean for those people, except for what I had read. So I actually was fortunate enough to attend some of their therapy sessions and sort of sit on the background to see how that's going and to learn more about their problems, and to also talk to them afterwards about that. So in that way, sort of try to understand them better. And one thing I also really like in that is sort of that there's a rise of involving patients more with research, with the design of research. We're asking them to give their ideas and comments on the research. So, and importantly, those will be people who then don't participate anymore on the research, so that they also know that beforehand and can really give their honest judgment on the research. And in that way, hopefully, it's better possible to bring the research closer to what they're going through and their problems, and to sort of take their everyday problems that they encounter also into account better.
What is the one thing you wish you had known before pursuing your field of study?
The one thing I wish I'd known. No, I don't think there's anything that I wish I'd known. No, well, maybe. No, I don't think there's really. There's really anything I wish I'd known. The only thing is, I guess, the one thing that I gave as advice to other women in STEM, to make sure that you're surrounded. So I've been fortunate enough to, I think, at most places that I've been, to really have been in a supportive environment. And but if I think that would have been one thing that I would have liked to have even been more aware of, to sort of make sure that you're in this supportive environment, which, collaborates and really also can bring opportunities to you, like, yeah, what I said before. If any other questions pop up, of course, we have the Ask Me Anything session, so in there it can be as well, but also outside. People can always email me or whatever way they would like to contact me to ask questions or discuss something.